Well, I'm amused to hear that we're into a new era of collaboration now that they've got a majority. This is a government and a prime minister with an autocratic streak a mile wide.
Well, I mean, okay.
Rosemary Barton opened her CBC panel by framing that Mark Carney's government is a moment of strength and stability. Everything was going smooth and positive and predictable. But then Andrew Coyne unapologetically said the quiet part out loud. And in that moment, viewers across the country heard a warning that you don't usually hear on CBC. Let's take a look.
At issue tonight, a new dynamic on Parliament Hill with by-elections won and a majority secured. The Prime Minister says the Liberals are committed to collaboration.
We need to continue to work with all parliamentarians. We will do so, work with all premiers, which we will do so, work for all Canadians.
But the official opposition is still frustrated with how the Liberals got their majority.
We are in unprecedented territory. Never before has a prime minister fundamentally tried to change the nature of the government that he was elected on from the people through these kinds of backroom deals.
So what does a Liberal majority mean for how Parliament operates? What could the changes mean for Canadians? I'm Rosemary Barton. Chantal, we'll start with you. What do you make of where we are with this majority and the way the Prime Minister is presenting it as an opportunity to further collaborate with opposition parties?
So just before Chantal starts to answer, you know, the bias is there right from the beginning. So first they're trying to say, well, you know, and the Conservatives are frustrated by the way that Mark Carney has attained that majority. Well, I wouldn't say they're frustrated. What they're saying is this isn't democratic. And this has never happened in the history of Confederation, that a government has secured a majority government, which is essentially changing the outcome of a general election that Canadians voted on by trying to convince everybody and poaching everybody of backroom deals. It's never happened. And she's giggling and she's laughing, about the fact that, Mark Carney has a majority. Ha ha ha. Canadians aren't laughing, Rosemary. And she's about to find out that there's some people on this panel, they're not laughing either.
Well, on that last point, I guess we'll see as time goes by. It's the easiest thing in the world to say, and then the harder stick to implement. I do believe that the Prime Minister at this point has poll numbers that make it difficult for the opposition parties to play obstruction games without giving him a rationale for telling Canadians I need to go back to the polls and have a general election, which I don't think any opposition party wants. But I also happen to think that bottom line, the result and the majority status is good news for the NDP, is good news for the Bloc Québécois. For the NDP, because they get more certainty that they have at least 2.5 years to reorganize, short of some unforeseen event, because we would normally not now go back to the polls till 2029, and they need that time. Mm-hmm. And over that period, there is a chance that sentiment on the left, on the progressive side, will build against this government. In the case of the Bloc Québécois, seriously, Yves-François Blanchet has always wanted safe shelter from what's coming in Quebec, the Quebec election next fall, and whatever may happen from then on. Mm-hmm. And he does get that as a result. And whatever leverage he's losing in the House of Commons, given the Quebec agenda, is a small loss. The Conservatives, well, it depends. Conservative Party versus Pierre Poilievre, not good news for Pierre Poilievre. But I do think many Conservatives are happy to feel that Pierre Poilievre is qualified to be the leader of the official opposition, and they don't need to worry about having a leader who may actually replace the Liberals for a couple of years.
So I agree with Chantal on a couple of points here. I do think it's very good news for the NDP. If you're in the NDP, you're really happy about a majority government because it means that you don't have to go even further into debt to go back to an election. It gives you time to fundraise, it gives you time to get your message out there, and it gives time for your new leader, whether you like him or not, Avi Lewis, to try to solidify what their identity actually is, and then to convince progressive voters to actually get over there. And right now, moving progressive voters away from the Liberals back into the NDP, that is actually good news for the Bloc, and it's actually good news for the Conservatives. Because when you see that vote split between the NDP and the Liberals, that makes it all the more easier for the Conservatives to actually gain more seats. So there's that. And she's also saying that Pierre Poilievre is an excellent leader of the opposition, and it allows the Conservatives time and allows them to not have to worry about going into an election and to think whether or not Pierre Poilievre is going to be the guy to have to convince a whole bunch of Canadians in a very, very short amount of time that he is better than Mark Carney. Let Mark Carney convince everybody of that himself.
Here, I want to really talk about the way things have looked since Monday, Andrew, and some of those points that Chantal raised.
Well, I'm amused to hear that we're into a new era of collaboration now that they've got a majority. This is a government and a prime minister with an autocratic streak a mile wide. You know, they brought in legislation, you know, Henry VIII Acts that allow ministers to rewrite legislation unilaterally. They brought in legislation that allowed the police to demand subscriber info from internet service providers without a warrant. Legislation that would allow or deny asylum claimants the right to an independent hearing, and that was with a minority. So what would they do with the majority? Well, we don't have to really guess. We just have to look back at the last two majority governments, the Harper majority and the Justin Trudeau majority, when committees were essentially complete rubber stamps of the government, when legislation, omnibus bills, hundreds of pages long, became quite routine, when they invoked closure literally every other bill. So I don't think we're about to enter an age of a newfound collaboration or democratic spirit. When you see the Prime Minister expressing disdain for the way in which the opposition members have been behaving themselves in committee, that they haven't quite been behaving the way he would like them to, but contented now that he'll be able to make them behave in the way that he would like to, I don't see a lot of signs of a collaborative spirit there.
Well, I mean, okay,
The change in demeanor of Rosemary Barton before and after Andrew Coyne made his statements there is telling. I don't even know if I need to say very much, because she was happy, she was jovial, she thought what he was saying was a bit of a joke, and then he goes on to actually talk about, no, I'm not joking, and here's all of the reasons why. These are facts. These are not in dispute. And he's saying that this government has an autocratic streak a mile wide. Goes on to say they've tried to actually implement police state bills. They've tried to implement bills where the police can get your internet history without a warrant. They've tried to implement the Henry VIII Act, which would allow ministers to completely rewrite legislation and exempt any individual or company from almost any law outside of the criminal code in Canada. Rosemary Barton wasn't smiling and she wasn't laughing after that, I can tell you. And you could see it plain as day. And he's saying, what? We're going to be more collaborative now that we have a majority, and we've been complaining for months that the opposition has actually been doing what their constitutional job is? Really? You're going to be more collaborative? Right. Well, for any evidence in that collaboration, just look at what's going on in the Ethics Committee right now, where the Liberals are fighting tooth and nail and throwing temper tantrums like little children because they don't want Francois Philippe Champagne and the CEO of Alto to actually appear at committee to answer questions on Champagne's potential conflicts of interest. But, right, you're going to be even more collaborative than you were when it was a minority government, when you had to be collaborative. Got it.
Althea, to that point, I mean, I viewed the Prime Minister's comments there as being, this is a serious time. I expect politicians to do serious work and not, talk about silly things and become sort of clip farms for social media. Maybe that is disdain. I don't know, as Andrew characterizes it, but it also seemed to me perhaps something that Canadians might want to see.
And here the true bias is on full display for CBC. Remember, CBC claims that they are unbiased. They are neutral. We don't claim to be unbiased or completely neutral on Northern perspective. We do claim to be fair, and that's different. But when Rosemary Barton hears this condemnation and this criticism of what the Carney government actually has done, and then tries to say, well, blah, 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 well, I just view it as, he doesn't like the click farming, and he doesn't like, what's going on in committee, and I think lots of Canadians like that. And this is the CBC trying to say, Canadians, this is what you should think. We've said this before. If any of you, I know a lot of you don't, but if any of you end up watching mainstream media, whenever they say, Canadians don't like this, or Canadians want this, or Canadians think this, they're not telling people actually what Canadians think. They're telling Canadians what to think. That's a big difference. So when she goes on this little, reframing rant here, it's damage control. What a neutral panelist should do, and criticize Piers Morgan all you want, he actually kind of does this. Even though when he's participating in discussion, he does show his bias. As a neutral host or a neutral moderator, what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to take what a panelist has just said, condense it, reframe it, and package it for the next person with the intent that they said. So what she should have said is, Althea, is Andrew Corn right? Is this Carney government going to be displaying a massive autocratic streak based on the legislation that they've already introduced? That's what she should have said. And then if somebody is Carney friendly, she should say, well, what do you think, Andrew? So and so says that Mark Carney, is actually committed to stability. He's committed to collaboration, and that he's demonstrated it by doing X, Y, and Z. Do you agree with that? That's what you're supposed to be doing. I know this, and I'm not even a host of a legacy media program. But this is why Canadians have turned off the CBC and will continue to turn off the CBC. And it's going to get worse for them because the bias, it is so blatant, it's not even funny.
I'm not sure that we've really seen that, though, in this parliament. Certainly that dominated the previous parliament, like the last few months of Justin Trudeau's tenure, but I don't think that we've seen it that way. I think he's just trying to show that he's kind of building a national unity government, and he's poaching from all sides and trying to give a strengthened message of national unity. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, especially thinking that, there's a possibility of a Quebec referendum on the horizon. There's definitely a possibility of an Alberta referendum. I think it's interesting. I agree with everything my colleague said. I think that the omnibus bills, though, and the time allocation was already a feature of this Carney government. I think it puts more pressure on the government to deliver. They could say with C5, for example, that bill that allows them to bypass other laws, that they needed this because it was a moment of crisis. But now they're in charge. If they think that those bills are problems, then repeal the Assessment Act, repeal the tanker ban, basically do what the Conservatives have been suggesting that you should do if you genuinely think those are the problems. So I think it puts some pressure on the government.
So first off, I'm actually very surprised that Althea completely shuts down Rosemary Barton. She's like, yeah, click farming isn't really going on right now, and they're just doing their job. I think it's interesting the fact that she says that the Liberals have to be very careful now because they were using C5 as this excuse of, we have to get this done right now. And, we're in a minority government. So, we're just going to do this. Now they're in charge. Now there's no excuses. And this is what we've been saying. And this is where it's actually going to play to the Conservatives' advantage. Mark Carney can't get anything done. Can't get anything built. Canadians are going to see for themselves. They don't need anybody telling them. They're actually going to see, well, wow, Mark Carney, like I forgot about that guy. This is 2 years from now. Nothing's happened. And affordability is worse. And where's the deal with where's all the things that they've been promising? This is what's going to be a problem for Mark Carney, especially the fact that with the majority, there are no excuses. That's going to be the big issue. And if he tries to rule this with an autocratic iron fist, that's where folks like us come in. That's where folks like Juno News come in. That's where folks like every other independent media outlet out there comes in. That's where the Conservatives are going to continue to call it out. Despite the fact that the government will try and shut down debate, they'll try and shut down any committee discussion on it, they will do what they can. And anytime the Liberals try and shut it down, it will make it out to social media. And Canadians will see.